The power. It had been a brutal beating, so brutal that it put William in hospital. He had been found lying unconscious on the wet ground in an alley off the mean street where William lived with his mother. When he finally came to, he told police that he couldn't remember what had happened or who had beaten him. But he remembered. He remembered. It had been the three monsters. The three monsters. Dominic, Richard, and Kurt. William was a nice boy. Nice as a pejorative. He lived with his mother, got good grades, and hung out at the public library. He was quiet, kept his head down, and avoided social media. In other words, he was a perfect target. When William told his mother he was being bullied, her response was, "Oh, just ignore them and they'll go away," or, "If you let them upset you, they win." But William's mother was self-absorbed and not quite right since his father died, so he just stopped talking about it. But when he wound up in the hospital with a head injury, she suddenly wanted to know all about it and who had beaten him so severely. So did the police. But William said he couldn't remember. There was a code on the street and at school that one didn't squeal, and it was a rule William didn't intend to break. Not that it did him any good in the end. One dark night, after he had been released from hospital, William was hurrying to the library to return a science fiction novel before it was overdue, and he ran smack into Richard. Richard wasn't a big guy, but he was mean. He knocked the book from William's hand, and when William stooped to pick it up, Richard grabbed him by the front of his shirt and pulled him forward so they stood face to face. Richard had bad teeth and very, very bad breath. "You tell the cops anything, punk?" he hissed. "No," William whined, unable to stop himself from sounding weak. You know what will happen to you if you do. We'll kick your head in again," Richard said, as he slapped William across the face. Hard, very hard. William was rocked back a step, and then a funny thing happened. Except maybe it wasn't so funny. William saw red, as in everything before him vanished into a swirling red mist. His whole heart, his whole being swelled with hatred. And then the mist began to clear, and when it cleared, he saw Richard slap his own face. His own face. Richard's face. Hard. "Hit me, you little..." Richard screamed, unleashing a flood of expletives. But then, before he could attack, Richard once again slapped his own face, and then began punching himself in the head, before falling to the ground, where he started banging his head on the concrete pavement. When he eventually raised his head, Richard's face was bloody. He appeared to be missing teeth, and he staggered to his feet and lurched to a nearby streetlight. to begin bashing his face against the metal pole. William just stood there in shock. Richard, his face a bloody pulp, was screaming now, and his wailing, along with the clanging of the pole, brought Old Man Cushing out of his house, which was directly across the street. "What the hell do you think you're playing at?" Old Man Cushing yelled. But then he was always yelling at people, especially young people. "Stop that noise, or I'm gonna call the police." Police? The thought of the police terrified William, but before he could react, Richard, the crazy fool, stopped banging his head and leapt onto the road, like some jerky marionette, right into the path of a car, which was coming down the street too fast, way too fast. The driver swerved, but still clipped Richard, whose body sailed through the air and hit the asphalt with a thud. But in swerving, he lost control and crashed into the front of Old Man Cushing's house, after running over Old Man Cushing. William ran then, after picking up his book first. He really didn't want to get an overdue. William stayed in the library until almost closing time, unable to do homework, unable to read, stunned by what he had just witnessed. He sat at one of the listening stations and listened to Ravel's Bolero over and over and over again. It had all happened so fast, and it didn't make any sense. But what concerned William the most was, did I do that? Did I do that? Just before it happened, I wanted to hit Richard. I wanted to kill him, he said to himself. And then Richard died, for William was sure he was dead. And indeed, he was. William stopped when he saw the crowd. The two bodies under sheets told him all he needed to know. The cops were there, talking to a distraught man, obviously the driver of the car involved in the accident. Accident? Was it an accident? Just then, someone kicked William in the rear end, making him stagger, and turning around, he saw big, tough, stupid Kurt towering over him. "Too bad it wasn't you, punk," he sputtered, showering William with spit. William saw a flash of crimson, heard a loud crack, and when his vision cleared, saw Kurt lying on the ground, his right leg twisted at an odd angle, and he was screaming. William hurried away home, where he went to bed early, but not to sleep. And during the watches of the night, he pondered what had happened, and more importantly, had he done it? But how? What was this strange power? Where did it come from? And was he making these things happen? Was he making them happen? Did it have anything to do with his head injury? Eventually, William slept, and all his dreams were in crimson. Crimson, the color of blood. To be continued.